All right, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness. With fall hunting and trapping seasons just around the corner, you're running out of time to whip yourself into shape, and you need to get on it. So with that, if you want to go and check out some of the online programming, go to mountaintoughfitness.com, use the promo code OKS30, that's all caps 30, for a free 30-day trial. Now, my guest today is a Minnesota native who is known for his amazing fur handling skills. In fact, his passion and dedication to the craft of putting up fur led him to start his own entrepreneurial journey into the fur trade. He just so happens to be the owner of Top Lot Stretcher Company, which specializes in the appropriately sized stretchers for each fur bearer, along with a bevy of other trapping products. And it also is the first type of stretcher I ever purchased. Leon Windschitl, welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be on.
Yeah, we were just talking beforehand. You have the most difficult last name that I've had to try to pronounce so far, and you coached me into it, I think, okay, and hopefully we got it right.
Yep, you did. You got it right. We won't have the listeners listen to your first attempt at it, but your second one was like spot on, so you did really good.
Yeah, look, it only takes me 3 or 4 times to get something right. And the same goes for trapping. So it's a pretty good, steady pattern in my life. But Leon, I appreciate you being here. And to kick things off, the question I always really like to ask guests first and foremost is to really reach back into the piggy bank of your memories and recount for us, like, what is the first time in your life you ever remember being exposed to trapping?
So for me, that'd take me all the way back to early high school years. I would probably say probably like my 8th grade year. There was some guys in my class that study hall would be talking about trapping some of the animals they caught that morning, and just being involved in that conversation was like, hey, that sounds pretty cool. Sounds like something I want to try. And I grew up on a farm, and within a quarter mile of my dad's farm, right there was the rivers. So after hearing some of those guys' comments and some ideas they put into my head to give a try, I went down there to try my hand at muskrat trapping, and that's basically what we started with.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, so I don't want to judge, and I'm not judging an age by anything, but what year was this about when you were first being exposed to your buddies trapping?
I would say this is probably around maybe 80, 81, somewhere right around there.
So was this still at the peak of kind of that late 70s, early 80s fur boom? Like, were these guys that were in your class trapping, were they the guys rolling in with like the newer truck that they got off of trapping or things like that? What was the real reason? Like, was it a little bit about, the fur as well?
Well, it was a little bit about money back then. We were definitely start of the decline on the price, but yet it was still good money. I mean, I can still remember the muskrats that first season I caught. I probably, off of my head, averaged about $3.50 to almost $4 on my rats. But going back in time, working on a farm for other farmers, you would be walking beans or baling hay for $2.50 an hour. So you were making more on one rat than you could make in an hour's work. So there's a little bit of incentive that way too.
Yeah, the economics of that definitely play in your favor. So when you were listening to these buddies talk about muskrat trapping, like, what was the point that got you to actually go from a passive listener to say, man, that sounds like a pretty interesting thing to do, and I have access to a creek or a river system, to actually getting out there? Did you have like a mentor in your family or somebody, or did you just go by yourself and start to figure it out on your own?
Well, it really basically started just getting a little bit of advice from some of the guys at school there, and just the drive to go out and give it a try because it sounded really fun. They really were excited about it. So I went out on my own and tried it. And of course, not knowing much, and you're only going to get so much information. Back then, it's not like it is now. And I was down there doing some trapping, and about a week into it, it would actually been my dad's cousin. He did a little bit of trapping, and he came up to the farm place and was wondering, you got somebody down there trapping? Because we see some tracks down there, footprints, and we seen a couple of traps. Whoever it is really doesn't know what the heck they're doing, you know. And then so my dad didn't know I was even doing it, so he asked me and my brother, "Any of you guys down there trapping?" I'm like, "Well, I'm trying to." So so he ended up taking me down there the next day and showed me some of his sets, and that was kind of the start of me actually having some success. So after getting a little bit of guidance on what a muskrat slide really looks like, and this is how you should place your trap and how deep in the water, those kind of things. I think it only took about 2 days after that, and I caught my first muskrat. So,
Oh, so in those original attempts that somebody had seen, like the rough sets you were making, you didn't catch anything. It wasn't until you kind of got a tap on the shoulder and said, "Hey, like, let me show you the ropes a little bit," that you had success.
exactly. I mean, I'm going to be too embarrassed to actually try and describe my so-called attempt at what I thought was a muskrat set. But yeah, my success didn't come until I actually, had a little bit of guidance there to get me started on it. So,
Yeah. And I think that goes for a lot of people. And for me, as an adult onset trapper, my memory is not too far removed from some of my first attempts of, what would be very embarrassing to describe today. But I won't have you describe what you think that set would have looked like in real time, but can you remember what it was like when you did walk up on that first rat that you had in a trap? I guess you've been doing it for a month or so with limited success, but like, what was that feeling when you came up on it?
well, the first thing was, of course, the thing had to be alive. And anyhow, so you're walking up there and it's like, holy cow, wow. I mean, it's 100% excitement. I caught a muskrat. And now all of a sudden it was like, now what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, these guys were talking about them, going out in the deep water and they drowned. In this case here, the muskrat got the chain of the trap tied up in the grass so it couldn't get down into the deep water. So it went from excitement to, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I need to put this animal down. And it's like, the school bus is coming in like 20 minutes and I need to hurry up and get back. So it was a lot of excitement, and then the stress of getting it put down. And once I got that taken care of, then the excitement levels just over the top, and you just can't wait to get to school to tell your buddies, "Hey, I finally got my first muskrat." So.
I want to keep taking that storyline because I think it's beautiful because you get it, you have the excitement, and then you have the fear. You overcome that fear. You have your first take, and then you get on the school bus and you go to school. You tell your buddies, but then I'm going to go on a limb and say that you then get home later in the day and you have another probably fear-inducing moment ahead of you, which is, now how do I skin this critter and how do I put up the fur? Or was this something that you were selling whole at the time?
No, you are very insightful, because that is exactly what happened. Was like, okay, now guys, what do I do with this thing?
So
So
you
they
had
were
an
trying.
8-hour window at school to get educated on what came
Yep,
when you
yep.
got
So they
home.
were trying to tell me how to do it, how to kind of string it up by a hind leg and do it. And I mean, it probably took me an hour to get it done, but let's just say, like pretty much everyone else, the first pelt you skin out, you're going to put a hole in it. And, even though we've got top lot stretcher and I'm known for putting up fur, that first muskrat, I can remember to this day, there's 3 holes in that sucker. So,
Wait,
and that's all just
you're not supposed to have holes in your fur? Because if you look at a lot of mine, even today, I struggle.
right. Right. And that's just all part of that learning curve. If somebody would have been there, on my shoulder talking me through it, I'm sure I would have done a much better job. But it was, again, you're like 14 years old and you got kids, putting ideas in your head how to skin it, and you have to picture it. Nowadays everyone's got YouTube and things like that to look at. And back then it was just word of mouth.
Well, I definitely count my lucky stars because I definitely did benefit from YouTube 100%.
Okay.
Definitely beat down the learning curve, but I have a lot of respect for everybody who had to do it back before that, whether it was word of mouth or just rote learning the hard way. But
Sure.
you got that fur put up. couple holes in it. What did you end up doing with it? Do you remember like what you did with your first fur? Was it immediately taking it to the fur buyer to see what he'd say? And with a few holes, I'd be curious what his feedback was.
Well, really what I ended up doing was didn't sell any fur until ice up, basically. So I had the few rats. And then, of course, I had the excitement of catching my first mink that first year as well. So and that got to be another thing of, now how do I skin this and put that up? But yeah, I got them all put up. And back at that time, pretty much every town had a fur buyer. And the guy that helped me get my muskrat sets out basically took my pelts to the local guy and sold them there. So.
Do you remember what the price was? I know you said that it was in the $3 range at the time, but were those first pelts, did they meet muster to get the top dollar amount?
Well, I'm still gonna guess it was still like that 325 to 375 range is kind of what it was. So it was excitement there, and then just that little bit of success, and now finally learning how to do it. Of course, that money went right to the hardware store and bought yourself some more traps for next year. Because at that time, that's what it was. Locally you could buy traps, where it's a little different now, but that's kind of what we did back then, was just go down to the hardware store and spend every penny you got to get more traps, to get more furs. So
I don't think that has changed over generations, because at least for me, like as I've seen any margin of success on my trap line to put fur up, sell fur, it has all gone directly back into more
right.
Traps, more equipment, more stretchers. Some of my money has gone straight to you guys, and I appreciate that.
Well, that's good. You're at least on your pelt handling side, you're getting off on the right foot. So that's good to hear.
And you're a 14-year-old, you have this experience, you're getting a little bit of mentoring, you're learning. Were the hooks in right away? Like, did you know in that moment, like, I'm a trapper? And then the second question on the back end of that is, what was the evolution? Like, were there coyotes in the time, like around your dad's ranch? Were there other critters, whether that's, possums, skunks? Like, how did you start to expand beyond just the rats you were putting up?
Okay. So if we go back in time, back then, water trapping was for sure king. And now when it came to land trapping, at that time, there would have been fox around. There wouldn't have been very many coyotes at all back at that time, but there would have been fox. But now, understanding a little bit of trapping, I never did actually go to try and catch fox back then. But at that time, it was like almost a mythical creature to try to go after. It's like, man, you've got to be an experienced dude to be going out there to even try to be catching red fox. But, I know that's not true now, but at that time, that's kind of what the mystique was. I mean, even in the Trapper, you start reading articles in there, it's like, man, you better be on your game if you're going to be trying for that stuff. So I mean, I really just stuck to the water. And again, that river system that was by us, it was actually like a really low-lying area. So there was like a bunch of switchbacks in the small river there. So there ended up being always some colonies of beaver in there. So that got to be the next thing of excitement, was to catch a beaver. And again, didn't really know anything about it and wasn't even trying for beaver. It would just be a small one would get incidentally caught in your muskrat slide, basically. And there you'd have your small little beaver, and that would be the start of it, to, all right, now, hey, there's beaver down here. How do I catch those, And I mean, it took probably another couple of years before I actually caught a beaver intentionally at a set, but that got to be the passion there too, was just everything at the water, the rats. Always want to be trying to catch a mink here and there. Beaver, they were kind of abundant. And even back then, the coon numbers just weren't as high as how they are now. So catching a coon, I mean, that was a big feather in your cap too, as a young trapper anyhow, so some of those type of species is what I targeted then.
And a little birdie told me that it can be pretty cold in Minnesota. Did you immediately start with under ice trapping too, or was that something that came as you got more mature in your trapping career?
I guess I haven't really done a whole lot of under ice, but it's basically, yeah, it does get cold here, and it was really just trapping from the opener until ice up, and that was kind of what it got to be. Because of course, being in school back then, with sports and other activities, when it starts getting later in the year, you got those things, tugging at you as well. So it was really open water is what I kind of worked at the most. Doing some under ice came later on.
So you're get out of high school, you've been expanding around these different critters. What was the path? Because you mentioned like it was the early 80s when you got into it, and that was kind of like you said, we were starting to come down the backside of that fur boom.
Yep.
So the bottom falls out on prices, probably a lot of people vacate the practice overall. And what was it that kept you going through that? Or did you stop for a time? Or was it something that you've been in since that first muskrat?
Well, I actually did end up stopping for a couple of years. Once I got out of high school, I went to trade school for being a carpenter, which took me away from where I was living. And at that time, you're kind of like just living in a small apartment type thing. So between that and then right after that, starting a job and getting married right around that time too. So early on, it got to be moving away from home. Basically, just took a step back from trapping because it was really starting a career, starting a family. You had to focus on that. I'm no different than most people out there. I just came about all on my own. I didn't have no golden spoon in my mouth, so to speak. So you had to make something of yourself, and you all got to start somewhere. And I started out young with that. So I was probably working another couple of years once I got out of trade school before it basically got to the point where, hey, I think I could go out and do a little bit of trapping just for fun in the morning before I go to work. So now we probably skipped about, I'd probably say maybe 4 years, 5 at the most before I got back into it.
But this is interesting, Leon, because what you mentioned, I think, might have a common denominator across everything, which is you went to trade school for what again? Woodworking?
Carpentry.
Yep. And I happen to know that most of the stretchers I've gotten from you guys are made out of wood. I don't know if there's a correlation there or not, but what was it that you were doing as a carpenter in those kind of 4 years? And did you have any idea of what you might be doing down the line with a stretcher company, or was that just completely out of the picture at the time?
That wasn't even close to the radar screen at that point in time in life. Like I said, me and my wife, we got started off young and with our family. So, I mean, the focus was there. So it was all on that. And the stretcher part really didn't come about until much, much later, even when I was trapping pretty hard at first there, because at that point, I wasn't even putting up fur at that time because I didn't really have an area or a shop that I could process fur. So it was really just skinning what I had and put it in the freezer. And I was like most trappers, selling green. So then once we start getting to those, let's call it the middle 90s, I would say, prices were like getting really down on green stuff. And it was like, reading in the trapping magazines, you would see, the North American fur auction results, and you would see fur harvesters results. You're like, God, those guys are getting like twice the money than what I am trying to sell green. Man, I need to try this, And basically I was like everyone else. I just bought the cheap wooden handled flesh and knife that wasn't even close to having a sharp edge on it. But thank goodness I was young and had shoulders so I could push the stuff off on them coon with that knife. But that's really how it started, was basically. I think the first time I sent to an auction was probably only 10 or 12 of the skins that we caught that year just to try it out. And then kind of got to be, I didn't have any stretchers. So it's like, okay. And the auction houses had some dimensions, had some guidelines. And of course, being a carpenter, well, there you are. You find some scrap 2x4s and 2x6, and you keep cutting it down enough until you get something turned into a stretcher. And that's kind of what I did.
So literally your first fur that you essentially processed yourself and dried was on homemade stretchers. Because I was going to ask the follow-on question of, were you using a wire stretcher? Did you had bought something, but you answered and said you didn't have anything. So you did what any good tradesman would do, and you made it yourself.
Right. Again, when I was trapping at this time, coon was my thing, and also catching mink, just a kind of a pocket set kind of guy. Coon was the mainstay at that time. I mean, the numbers were there and they were available almost everywhere. So I was harvesting coon, and it got to be, like I said, yeah, I didn't have any wire stretchers, but hey, I got some wood, and even at that time there was talk, hey, if you put your coon up on wood, you get a better look. So it's like, okay, I'll give that a try as well.
Do you remember in your mind's eye what that first stretcher looked like?
Yeah, it's actually very, very close to the adjustable coon stretcher that we sell still today. I actually still have them. Those very first ones I made, they're still in my shop. And even when I get all the way down into the stack, I'll still use them if I need to. So that adjustable coon stretcher that we sell is very close to that original.
Well, I'd be curious, like I've worked in technology for a long time, and you think about you have a good product and things change over the years. Technology is much different than wood or steel, but from that first concept, and like you said, it stayed similar. What has been like the changes that have found their way into like the adjustable coon stretcher over the last 15, 20 years?
So the big thing at that time was, like I said, I was just grabbing very clean looking 2x4s and 2x6s, basically using soft pine is what that would have been, and made them into my stretchers and was using those. And the big change to basswood didn't come until probably about the second year I started selling stretchers. Kind of a story, if we want to get into that, of me actually getting into making stretchers to sell. I mean, I was just making them for myself. I had no desire to be a stretcher company at that time. I'm just a trapper. I want to put up my fur, put it up nice, and get top dollar for my stuff. So one year I went to the Minnesota Trappers. In January, they have what's called the winter meeting. And at that winter meeting, there's fur buyers there. The auction houses would be there to pick up fur. And also there was a pelt handling competition. And I've always read about it in the newsletters and things like that, but I'd never been to a winter meeting before. So the first one I went to, I ended up taking, what was it? It was either 5 or 6 different species, because in Minnesota at that time, you could harvest 16 different fur-bearing animals. And in the competition, you could have one of each animal in there, and whoever got the most points when all the grading was done, you get the title Master Fur Handler of the Year. So I went there with about 5 to 6 pelts just to see if I could place in these species, to see how I stack up against these other guys. Because I had some other guys come into my shop and like, hey, you really do a nice job. You're like, yeah, whatever, But so anyhow, I took those up there, and when they were getting ready to announce who was going to be the Master Fur Handler of the Year, the guy next to me, who I knew, he bumps me on the leg and he goes, "It's going to be you." And I'm like, no way. And sure as heck, that's what it was. I ended up winning just with the 5 to 6 different species I had there. And when it was all said and done, They all brought first place except one of the species brought second. So that's how I accumulated so many points with a minimal amount of pelts. So then the following year, of course, now, your confidence is high, man, I got to back up the title, So that next year I had, I think, 7 different species I took up there. And the exact same thing happened again. I ended up winning it back-to-back years. And the same thing happened. It was all of them got first place except one animal did not get first place. So the first year, like you can't believe it. And the second year, you're getting the award, and all you do is you're gritting your teeth with, what the hell took second place? What wasn't good enough? So it's amazing how your confidence goes from, maybe insecure to, over the top with confidence, with recognition for what you're doing.
So at that first one where you were surprised, right? You were just showing up with your 5 or so different species. You win. Did people start to pull you aside on that first year and be like, what are you doing? What are you doing, Leon? What's your secret? What's your trick?
Well, the first year it was really a shock factor because everybody was going, who the hell is this guy? Because I had never been there. I wasn't known by any means at all. And you just got to talk to a couple of the competitors, and that's kind of all it was. But it was that second year when, I had that really good success there again. And when the meeting was over, I went to go pick up my animals, and I couldn't find my coon pelt. And I'm like, where's my coon pelt? Well, some guy picked it up and he's looking for you. Well, this guy was running all over the place trying to find me. And when he finally found me, him and his buddy were, shoulder to shoulder, and he's got my coon in his hand, and he goes, "Oh, in the world did you scrape this coon so clean?" I'm like, it's just how I do it, and we kept talking and talking. He goes, "Well, what kind of stretchers do you use?" And I'm like, "Well, I use an adjustable stretcher." And at that time, hardly anybody even knew of an adjustable coon stretcher because it was always solids or wire. And I said, well, I make my own, and it's an adjustable coon stretcher. God, that is the best looking coon I've ever seen. I got to get me some of those. I want you to make me a dozen of those and bring them to the convention next year. I'm like, okay. And his buddy goes, me too. So I had 24 stretchers sold at the winter meeting in January. So I made those, and I think I made maybe another 3 to 5 other dozen just to bring along to say, God, do other people want these stretchers? Well, I found out, the convention at the time would have been Friday and Saturday. Well, I found out other people must have wanted them because by 9:30 Friday morning, I had no more coon boards to sell. So at that point, word was out. And then it turned into somebody wanted a fox stretcher. Then it turned into someone says, I need an otter board. Hey, Leon, do you make a coyote board? So it kind of led into multiple species like that. So the first 2, 3 to 4 years, it was just very marginal numbers that I would bring to the show. And of course, at that time, they were still made out of soft pine. I'm sure not everybody's aware of it, but I'm from southern Minnesota, and where we live, the only trees we have for the most part down here is corn. It's all DeKalb and Pioneer. So we don't have much for trees. So for basswood, that's a northern Minnesota over in Wisconsin. That's where you find a lot of the basswood. So in first year selling it, it got to be, people were like, well, I don't want these boards because they're not made out of basswood. So I had a couple sample pieces of basswood, and you'd show them with the push pins. It was really, really close. But of course, customers are always right. It's like, well, if you had them in basswood. So that led me into getting my hands on some basswood, which turned into more basswood and more and more and more. So now they are all basswood.
I have a question. When you were doing this, people were wanting, you started with your coon stretchers. You knew the dimensions you were looking for because you were also coon trapping, but you mentioned like it started to expand year over year where you said somebody's asking you now for coyote stretchers or this. What was the process of you figuring out how to home in on what the actual dimensions should be like, especially for critters that you might not have been as familiar with?
Sure. It was really a simple task at that time. I was trapping coon pretty heavy and mink as well. And at the time that was North American Fur Auctions, NAFA. They were the ones usually getting the highest dollar on their animals at auction, and that's who I was going with. And with them, when you were selling with them, you could get a pelt handling manual, and in there was some dimensions or guidelines for what they wanted the stretch to be on your animals. And that's what I used a lot of those numbers to come up with my boards. Some of my first boards are different than how they are now because I kind of followed their guidelines to a T. And then over time, when you're dealing with customers, you start finding out that not all the species are exactly those kind of dimensions. Maybe you need a little more shoulder here, or it should be just a hair narrower, or they should be a hair, the fine detail type things. Mink was one of the ones that stand out in my head at that time. NAFA guidelines for female mink was only 3¼ inches wide. Well, here in Minnesota, especially in the southern part, we got a good sized mink here. So when you're putting a female mink on that board, it was like, what do I do with all this fur? I switched over at that time. Fur harvesters, theirs were 3½. So I switched over to their guidelines for that. So that's kind of just one of the stories on, the changes I kind of evolved through.
And at what point, you're still a carpenter, you're raising a family, you're trapping hard for coon. All of a sudden you find yourself, being top lot in your association as far as putting up fur. You get people asking you for your secret. It's your stretchers. Year over year, you're getting more and more requests and for different critters. At what point do you have that light bulb moment? Or I know your wife's standing there. I assume it's probably your wife, because that's how mine goes too, of like the light bulb moment of saying like, hey, like maybe we should turn this into an actual company.
So once we made the switch from the soft pine to the basswood, then things took off more, because it was like beating your head against the wall trying to tell guys there's nothing wrong with this. It's like, well, okay, we'll switch to basswood. So once we started doing that, it was like, to get a good price, you would have to bring in larger volumes of basswood to get a better price break, to make a better margin. So we were getting more stuff brought in, and it kind of got to be, now this is a business. This just isn't going to the convention and throwing 10, 12 dozen stretchers up on a table and you sell out at the Minnesota show. It's like you're getting some calls from guys in South Dakota or guys down in Iowa. Hey, I heard about your boards. So it kind of turned into, maybe we've got something here that we could turn into a business. So as we talked about it, it's like, well, if we're going to have a business, we're going to have a business name. We want a brand name to our stretchers. It's not like, hey, let's go get some of Leon's boards or Leon's stretchers, or Jim Bob stretchers or whatever. Let's come up with a name for it. And even at that time, I just was starting to do some demos at like the Minnesota convention, and I'd be getting asked all the time, how many top lot coon did you get? How many top lot of this do you have? Because, through my friends, you kind of tight-lipped a little bit with, how much money you're getting on your pelts and all that. Cause I'm kind of a humble guy. I'm not a bragger and that kind of thing, but my friends knew I was always getting top lots on coon. Like, how many top lot coon did you have on this auction? Or did you get any top lot mink? So it was always getting asked, how many top lot? It's like, well, we all know the best is the best. It's top lot. So let's put that into, basically Top Lot Stretcher Company. And then we came up with the slogan of our forms provide you the perfect stretch. So we kind of had everything put together with a name and the slogan for it. And then at that time, I think my oldest daughter was probably about a senior in high school at that time. So that's when computers were coming around pretty heavy, and they had them at school. So it was like, we need like a logo. So sat down with one afternoon with her and kind of played around, and between ideas in my head and what she could do with the computer, came up with the logo that you see on our shirts today.
That's amazing. I want to take a quick detour,
Okay.
because you mentioned your daughter, and I ask a lot of parents that are trappers these questions before we come back to Top Lot and where you went after getting a logo. But I got started later in life with children, second marriage, and my 3-year-old will come on the line with me. Did your daughter or other children go with you on the trap line quite a bit? And if they did, like, how did you foster interest for them throughout their lifetime?
Well, we ended up having 2 girls, so the 2 daughters, and they were into sports and that kind of thing. So trapping didn't get to be too much on their to-do list, I guess. They always knew Dad's truck smelled really bad during trapping season with all the bait in the back end, so that was kind of a turn off. But when they were small, where my wife was working, she'd have to be away from work every now and then. So there would be a couple of times where there I was with the girls. It's like, all right, get dressed up. We're hopping in the truck, putting extra food in the cooler, and we're going to go out on the trap line. So I was lucky enough at those moments I wasn't pushing hard during the day, which if you are going to take kids out trapping, that's the last thing you want to do, because it's just too much in the day for them. So we did go out. We marched through the snow to go look at some coon cubbies and things like that. So they enjoyed that aspect of it. Later on, probably for like some photography classes and stuff like that, they would come along because it would be good ways of, coming up with interesting photos with Dad down in the water or with some animals, in a trap, that kind of thing. So they came along, and, they were definitely supportive of it. But not so much being out there in the water with Dad.
Yeah, well, I mean, even just being out there and being supportive, right? And having a good respect and understanding for the why, and that they could probably articulate well, is amazing. And so much so that, your oldest daughter ultimately helped create a logo that is,
Right.
The trapping community is relatively small, right? But like, I can picture your logo in my mind's eye immediately, because when I started, I went to my local fur. Well, it's Rocky Mountain Fireworks and Fur in Caldwell,
Okay.
Idaho.
Yep.
And they carry some of your stretchers. And so, like, it's funny because you'll walk in there and there'll be stretchers, whether they're wire or that, but you've got wood burned on a lot of your stretchers, the logo.
Yep. Yep.
It drew me to that. And I'm like, well, that looks a little more professional. I think I'm going to go with that one.
Well, Denise will be happy to hear that, because pretty much each and every one of the stretchers, she's the one branding the name onto those there. But so while you were at Rocky Mountain picking up your stretchers, did you happen to pick up a fleshing beam there? Because they also stock our fleshing beams as well.
Yeah, I can't pan my camera over to it, but it's one of those things, like, whereas the answer is yes. And it's a good thing, because I think a lot of people forget, like, I like to believe that trapping's having a slight resurgence. I think people post-COVID, I got started a little before that, but people post-COVID are starting to have a reconnection on where we come from and like what we've done as a species for a long time, whether that's hunt, trap, provide for our families. And for me, not coming from a hunting family, I was 2 generations removed from the last time my family was hunting or trapping or doing anything of that like. So I didn't have anybody. So when I did go down this path, yes, I had Uncle YouTube, which helped a lot. But ultimately, it wasn't until I walked through the doors of Rocky Mountain Fireworks and Fur and had the nice ladies there, guide me. And they say, like, look, you can kind of bundle these things. Like, you're going to need a fleshing beam. What critters are you trying to catch? You're going to need these stretchers and a fleshing knife and a tails. And the list goes on, but you're able to kind of bundle it. And frankly, just coming from like a marketing tech background, if I see matching logos on different things, it's like getting a matching set, right?
Okay.
And you put the things together and you rely on other people to guide you. And that's where I was guided, and how I first, 6-7 years ago, came across you guys. Now, before we started the show, I had one major complaint to file with you, which is that just because I use your stretcher doesn't mean my fur looks great. And I'm waiting for the auto stretcher to get all my dimensions and everything right for me. But yeah, I think my first fox was put on a Top Lot Stretcher Co stretcher.
Well, it must have got a top lot then, huh?
I plead the fifth on that one.
Okay. Did you save it and get it tanned for yourself then?
I know I'm going to do this even though it's against protocol. So it's a nice, beautiful little cross fox up there. I don't know if you can see it.
Nice.
Yep. Tail's not the best thing in the world, but it is, it was stretched appropriately and I tanned it myself and it still hangs here in my office.
Nice. Looks very nice.
Well, I appreciate that. That was, there's a lot that goes into that. But on that note, first and foremost, Leon, I think we're going to have to do a part 2 at some point because I have a million more questions for you.
Okay.
But there's a few things that I like to do with every guest, which is a little bit of a, we'll call them lightning rounds. But what, in your opinion, is the hardest animal to properly stretch?
To properly stretch.
And I might rephrase that in like, where do you see, or what critter do you see most people having the hardest time getting that top moniker?
I'm going to put bobcat on that one because usually with stretchers, everybody wants to know what's the right measurements for a proper stretch. And that's right in so many regards in so many animals. But when it comes to bobcats, there really is no true numbers for the proper stretch on a bobcat. Because really right now, when it comes to those animals, it's all about the belly, right? Everybody wants those wide white bellies with all the spots on there. So you have to show that off. So really the animal, the belly of the animal is going to tell you how wide to stretch it. You're really only going to be looking for like maybe about 1.5 inches of color on each side, and the rest you want to see belly. The last thing you want to see is the orangish or brownish color being 3 inches in on each side, and then the belly looks narrow. So you always want to try and keep the color to to that 1.5 inches down the sides, because now the belly looks wide. So that would probably be the species on that.
So bobcats. So next lightning round question. Thinking about new trappers, people like me who might have Uncle YouTube or maybe have a local mentor or something. What's one thing they could do to educate themselves better on proper fur handling?
Oh, I mean, the best thing for sure is to have a mentor, somebody that can just give you some of the ins and outs. I'm not a YouTuber that gets on there and looks at all that stuff, but I know it can get kind of confusing. The thing would be is if you can know a buddy in trapping and find out some of these YouTubers, who can I trust to watch on doing some things like that? That's what I would probably lean towards, because, when it comes to someone putting a video out, well, they're king of the world, right? Everybody knows everything. Well, we all know that's not true. So you got to kind of watch what you look out for there. We're kind of getting past dated on it a little bit, but we do have DVDs on pelt handling, younger generation, like, what's a DVD, So like I say, we're getting a little bit past that, but we still do sell DVDs. I mean, we have one on raccoon, we've got one on coyote, and we've got one on a combination of mink and muskrat as well. So there's those things still out there as well, if you still have a DVD player, to get you in on how to process fur.
Perfect. Next lightning round question. If you had to do one or give one tool or trick that would change someone's fur handling game outside of stretchers, what would it be?
Jeez. One little trick.
Or tool. I don't know if there's like a special knife you prefer or anything like that, but.
Well, I mean, I want to say your fleshing knife is for sure, your tool that you're going to be using the most. And I really don't want to just put one brand out there saying this is the one to use. I mean, I use a caribou fleshing knife. I mean, mine's getting close to 18 to 20 years old, A Nicker is a great knife out there. I mean, Weeby's got a good elite knife out there with the red handles. It's really, you have to learn how to use that tool. That's one of the things I really stress when I'm doing a demo is, if you keep repeatedly doing something, one simple process, if stroke 5, nothing happened, guess what happens when you get to stroke number 10? Nothing happened. It's either the tool, it's positioning, things like that. So I'd say your fleshing tool is number one important, but you have to learn how that tool works so it will work for you.
I think that's a beautiful suggestion, because like you said, when I first got started, I'm glad I had a set of shoulders on me just for the fact of pushing. But when you learn how to make the tool work for you, regardless of brand, it is a game changer. Okay, Leon, this is a tough one, so you can expound on it as much as you want or as little as you want. What do you see as the future of trapping?
Oh boy, no, I'm Nostradamus, huh? I see it continuing. If prices stay the way they are, it's still going to be just like you made the comment about earlier, where we are getting turned on to newer people who are trying to experience this thing that's been around for years and years and getting in touch with the outdoors. We're going to continue to have that. I guess the greatest fear we have here is not us as trappers. It's what's getting dictated to us by the antis. That's the big thing. In these last couple of years, we've had some losses out there that's definitely hurting different states in certain different ways. I mean, for us to continue to harvest like we are, it's really time to dig our heels in and keep what we have. We always want more for this and that. We're really to the point right now, we have to protect what we have. There's ongoing struggles and fights in different states all the time. Here in Minnesota, there's a group every single year that we go to battle with them every year to try to keep what we have. And we've had success for a number of years, but all it takes is one bad year. All it takes is the right legislator to listen to the other side. That gets to be an ongoing struggle, because even when it comes to court cases, we've had many losses in so many bad ways, which basically what I'm trying to say is we've got state biologists telling how trapping is beneficial, how what we're doing is not harming, and the judges they're not even listening to the proper evidence. They're playing with emotions and going with that, not reality. So
yeah, I was in Colorado this past weekend for the Colorado for Responsible Wildlife Management, fighting the whole mountain lion bobcat issue, and I was down with Dan Gates, who's fighting the good fight on behalf of the hunters and the trappers. And man, you're right, it's tooth and nail. New Mexico lost their public land trapping rights. Colorado, Oregon, Washington. It's sad to see, but I do agree, and I encourage, whether you're a seasoned trapper, new trapper. I mean, associations take us so far, and a lot of them are doing great works, but you need to join them. Without membership, without attendance, without
financial backing.
100%. And it's hard to open your wallet for those things, but if we don't, it's going to go the way we don't want it to go, and it's going to be harder and harder.
Right. You had mentioned you were in Colorado with Dan Gates out there. I mean, talk about a guy that's been putting his head against the wall and fighting the fight for years out there. I mean, he's very, very educated in how these fights and stuff, how they work and how to try to attack them. Even your home state right now in Idaho, you got a loss there too with is it the grizzly bear that caused this latest go around for you guys?
Yeah, the kerfluffle. It was funny because I've talked about it before. I feel very fortunate that I'm I started my trapping career in Idaho, so I had every fur bearer. It's just the last bastion of real free trapping in America outside of Alaska. And what happened was Montana got hit with the grizzly lawsuit, and they lost 2 months, one on either end of their wolf trapping season. And I think we kind of looked with rosy glasses, like it's not going to hit us. We're Idaho, but sure enough, it hit, and we lost a month this year, in half the state. So it's coming. To your point, it's coming, and we have to dig our heels in, and everybody needs to be aware and focused on the fight, even if you're just getting into the recreation.
Exactly. Yep.
So Leon, like I said, we're going to have to do a part 2 at some point, because I have like 70 more questions here listed and some that have popped up beyond there. But what I do want to do before we wrap here, for people like myself, and a lot of new trappers are coming in and listening to this podcast, Top Lot Stretcher Company, you guys do way more than just stretchers now. We talked about the DVDs, but what can people find with your company? Where can they find it? And what would you suggest for them if somebody's coming in, like start with 1 stretcher, 2 stretchers, 100 stretchers? Like, what's the right approach?
Well, first off, to find us, you can go on the website, toplotstretchercompany.com, and you can find our website there and cruise on that. The biggest thing, if you're new, we don't mind people calling in. Our number should be right there somewhere. And we get it all the time. Don't think you're going to be the first person to call up and ask, what do I need, or what do I need to do? We usually try to say, of course, you're going to need a fleshing beam, and then just do some onesie twosies. I mean, there's no need to get excited on a certain species until you find yourself as a trapper. Then we'll start talking numbers, and you can buy them by the dozens then. But I would say start small, because it is a learning curve, and it's like, let's make sure this is something you get your heart's into and you enjoy doing it. Now we'll move forward on it. Flesh and knives, skin and knives, we've got a lower price point on some of our equipment, and we've got the Cadillac stuff as well too. So but the big thing I want to point out is what we sell works. Don't be worried about the price on it. It's like, well, maybe that flesh and knife doesn't have a big dollar number on there, but I know you're going to have success with it, because that's all we sell. I mean, I get asked all the time to carry bunches of different flesh and knives and stuff like that, but I keep a short list because I want my customers to have success. So I know if you buy anything from us and you call us up with an issue with it, I can talk you through on the phone and get you going in the right direction.
Perfect. So everybody listening, I'll also link all of that in the show notes. So if you didn't write it out fast enough, it'll be there for you to go and click and look around. But Leon, I want to sincerely say thank you. I have learned a ton. I mean it when I say I want to do a second episode, because I do want to keep poking and asking on so many different elements with the experience that you have. But thank you. Thank you to your wife for helping get this set up. And for everybody listening, we'll catch you on another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast.